welcome. Let's talk a little bit today about organizational planning. It's often said that if you don't have a plan, any road will take you where you want to go, and that can be difficult within your organization, particularly when you have plans to move forward, but you haven't solidified what that means. We'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the perceptions of planning, the reality of planning, the process, what makes planning good, what makes it work. Typically if you say you're going to sit down and do a strategic plan, excuses roll in all over the place about why people don't want to participate. And the reality is thinking about creating a plan can be daunting. But we wanted to take a few minutes today to talk about why it's important to do this. And the first question you should ask is, what is your organization is aiming to accomplish? I mean, are you able to clearly and concisely state your organization's ultimate goal, what it is you'd like to do, where it is you'd like to go, who you'd like to impact? And it's important to understand that answering this question allows you and others to articulate what the long-term goal of your organization will be. Now, this is relevant because at some point to accomplish your plan, you're either going to need human capital, you may in fact need financial capital, you may need space, all the things that come with delivering your programs and services. And the better you can articulate where you're heading and what that vision is, the more likely you can acquire those external needs. So, one of the ultimate questions is if someone unfamiliar with your organization were to read what your plan contained, would it clearly define how you're going to be successful as an organization? So essentially understanding what you're aiming to accomplish. And then, secondarily, once you know what you want to accomplish, how are you going to get there? What are your strategies for making this happen? So describing your organization's strategies for accomplishing those long-term goals. So what will that take, in essence? Is it more money? Is it new programs? Is it more people? Is it you need to do research in a certain thing? You need to pilot some program? What are the things you need to do to make sure that your strategies or your long-term goals will be accomplished through your strategies? And the second part of the first question, what we'd like to do, is complemented when you think a little bit about if someone were to ask you, well, that's wonderful, this is what you want to do, how are you going to do it? And understanding what those strategies are is vital to that process. So what are we going to do to accomplish those goals would be the second part of your planning. And then another aspect is, what are your organization's capabilities for doing this? So it isn't enough to simply suggest that we're going to need more money, more space, more research, or pilot a program. But it'll be important to know what it's going to take for those things to happen. So detail the resources, the capacities, connections. What will it take for you to get there? What tools do you need? How do you need to strengthen your organization? Is it more staff? Is it collaborating with another organization? Is it studying other organizations' programs to figure out how they do something? How your specific capabilities and how they're aligned with your long-term goals can help you deploy your resources effectively. And this allows those people who've invested in your organization to know that you don't simply have a vision and you haven't simply identified what it will take to get to that vision, but you've outlined the details in doing so. And it provides a lot of confidence for them in knowing that they've invested in something that has some possibility of working. And then finally, how will your organization know if in fact you're making progress? This is often overlooked. You can spend a lot of time and energy outlining where you'd like to go, determining what it will take, knowing the details of implementing that, and often forget that we need to know how we're going to measure if we're making progress. It isn't good enough to simply have a plan, but the idea that we're going to measure how to make progress is vitally important. And oftentimes, organizations will assemble a task group to monitor the progress of the plan. But oftentimes, the measurements can be quantifiable, and sometimes they're not. And there's not a best case scenario, but the idea that you're going to monitor and determine that you're moving forward is of vital importance. Helps you stay on track, allows others to have confidence in what you're doing, shows the world that you're taking this very seriously. A side note, it certainly oftentimes happens that we need to make a change to our plan, and that is certainly appropriate. We've noticed that something didn't work and we're going to modify it, and if you're not tracking your progress, you may be unaware that you need to make a course change, and that's certainly appropriate. The other idea about monitoring is the notion that we have some sense of what we have and haven't accomplished to date. So we've set a set of goals in place, and we've determined how we're going to get them. We understand the details of how we're going to accomplish those things. The other thing is to think a little bit about what we have and haven't accomplished thus far. Plans, when we're doing long-term planning, one of the challenges can be we end up in a group setting and we do a lot of group think over a period of time, and what we end up with is more of the same. And that certainly can be viable. It isn't all that exciting, but we want to think a little bit about in the process taking stock in what we've accomplished to this point is important in the process. A, so that we don't end up with a plan that's just more of the same, but B, we can take into account what our strengths have been getting to this point. Another way of thinking about sort of this process is in your organization, how you implement your planning is going to be impacted a little bit about where you are in your life cycle of your organization. Organizations, according to the Adesi's life cycle, follow a curve, and that curve has the beginning of the organization, the courtship, the infancy of an organization where you're beginning to develop programs, services, and then what Adesi's calls the go-go stage. And oftentimes organizations do a lot of planning in the go-go stage because that is the point at which organizations' need for what they're doing grows, and their ability to deliver it is compromised for a lot of reasons. Not enough money, not enough people, not covering enough territory. There's a whole notion of a whole list of things that can impact your ability to deliver certain services. But it's also a reflection of the fact there's high demand. And as organizations get to adolescence, they begin to look at, now that we've to some degree stabilized the delivery of programs, what does the organization need to do to make sure we're strong around that? So that's the period at which we look at things about not just delivery, but how are we providing oversight and governing and assembling the organization to ensure that, according to Adesi's, we reach the period of being in the prime phase of our life cycle, and that is just about the point at which things are going perfectly. Final refinements are made. You have the exact group of human beings, both as volunteers and staff. You have the exact program, the size, funding is not as huge an issue. And that's the peak of the Adesi's life cycle. And most organizations strive to stay at the maturity point naturally, but oftentimes they realize that they're beginning to go down the backside of this curve, and they hit a stage where things have not changed, or they believe they're impervious to improvement. And that rapid decline should be met with a period of renewal prior to getting to a point where we can't turn around. The end of the life cycle obviously is death, but most organizations have an opportunity at the renewal phase to figure out where do we go next, and that's oftentimes another great spot for planning. So I have found that planning happens when demand for program increases, and how are we going to address that, and then when we reach a point at which we understand that we've been moving along in this way, and we need to make sure that we're still on top of our game, and that we need to investigate what's the next step for us. So, interesting to think about where your organization is in that life cycle. Things to think about when you do planning. Who should be involved? Oftentimes, internal staff, key leaders, key volunteers, board members. Some people include donors. Some people include people who are served by programs. Everyone who has a stake to some extent in what you do, from a very high level to a very low level. We need to gather facts. We need to consider what the marketplace looks like. We need to think about what resources we have available to us in terms of currently delivering program. We need to determine, again, what the goals are going to be. We need to then put that into the stages of our plan. What do we want to accomplish? What will it take to get there? How are we going to put that into play, etc.? And then, of course, we want to evaluate. Things to think about that people include in their planning. Well, a lot of groups include their mission statement. A lot of people do some external and internal evaluations so that they have the ability to understand what the pluses and minuses of moving in any direction are. And that's helpful when external people are evaluating our plan. goals and objectives if you have multiple parts of your plan and you have different segments that you want to evaluate. Descriptions of those programs. Timeline. We need to think in our plan over what period of time will we accomplish something. The other issue becomes, quite frankly, we need to think about the financial aspect. Do we have a budget that's appropriate? And again, are we going to monitor and evaluate this plan ongoing, and how are we going to do that? And on the back end of all this hard work, well, we hope to improve our performance. We hope to put our organization in a position where culturally we understand that we should always be thinking forward as an organization and not about today or yesterday. We also think a little bit about, it certainly provides clarity about the future direction of our organization. Sometimes planning can solve major organizational issues. If you think about an organization that's at a stage of maturity and they don't want to get too staid in what they do, going to a period of renewal and looking at a strategic plan, a long-range plan, can often serve to avoid some of the challenges that organizations suffer. One of the outcomes of planning is you're building teamwork. You're getting a lot of external expertise, and I think you're building a sense of organizations moving forward in lockstep. And it also gives you an opportunity to have influence over your organization rather than let others influence your organization from the outside. Now, some organizations, unfortunately, meet some of the limitations of planning, and some of those can be when the process of going through the strategic plan outweighs what you get on the back end. Sometimes organizations are dealing with emergency situations, and they're quite frankly more important than creating a plan. And we need to have a sense for when that is the case, and then we need to address those first. The other issue that can constrain organizations is when implementation of a plan is unlikely. We've thought of a great plan. We have some great ideas. We've thought about all the issues that are in front of us, but from time to time, things can crop up that make implementing a plan unlikely, whatever they are: internal politics, external situations, there are times when, for organizations, doing a plan, subverting the process, not thinking about each of the components and being thoughtful about how we're going to assemble this and monitor it, can often be less successful than simply relying on some leaders who have a great vision and great intuition. Planning takes time, and if organizations don't want to take the time to plan, one could certainly question whether planning at all is in the best interest of the organization. So we're going to implement the plan once we develop it. We want to continue to review the plan, and as I mentioned earlier, when you think about the plan and you're monitoring it, there are times when things change, and you should take the opportunity to modify the plan ongoing. As a lot of people refer to their strategic plan or their long-range plan as a roadmap, and if we're following our roadmap and there's a detour in the road, we have to figure out how to get around the detour. So, that's an analogy that works for a lot of folks. Sometimes we have to make changes and then we get back on the road, and that's certainly appropriate. I certainly hope this has given you an opportunity to think about how you might plan, what some of the details are involved in planning. Just remember, if you're going to rush the process, you're probably not going to end up with something as much depth and detail as you need. And on the other hand, you certainly don't want to be in a situation where you plan so long that there's no plan at the end. But don't hesitate to involve external folks. Don't hesitate to involve staff, board, donors, people who take real interest in what you do in your organization. And again, monitor that plan and think carefully about what changes might we need to make as we follow through on that plan. Good luck to you. I hope all works out.